Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Durst. I've been hiring, firing, and mentoring executives, frontline employees, interns, and job seekers in companies around the world through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. I work with people in Hong Kong, India, Australia, and across the United States. What sets them apart? A lot, but there's more they have in common. And one of those commonalities is transition is a part of life. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions that are big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet, the people who can make the difference that matters to you right now. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big change. The insight track you're going to access during our future episodes is better than a crystal ball. It's the exact information you need to take that next step. Whether you're a new grad applying for your first professional job, someone looking to transition your work experience into a promotion, launching your own company, or maybe even starting to plan your retirement, you're in transition, and this series is for you. We all know transition can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have VIP access to the future you want. Are you tired of the uncertainty of being passed up? We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to the front of the line. So, if change is on your horizon, or maybe just the thought of change, you won't want to miss this discussion. It could be the exact edge you need to turn transition into an amazing opportunity. Jason Cochran, thank you so much for being on today's episode of People in Transition. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Me too, Bob. Thank you so much for having me on today. It's a pleasure to be with you and with your listeners today.
Jason, when you were younger, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I love that question, Bob. The answer is a truck driver. Maybe there's not been anyone else on who said they wanted to be a truck driver, but I was fascinated with trucks when I was a little boy. And my parents actually would record me playing with trucks. And so I actually have some little cassette tapes that my parents gave me of when I was a little kid, of them recording me playing with trucks and them asking me what I want to be when I grow up and saying I wanted to be a truck driver. Well, I didn't end up being a truck driver, but I ended up becoming a psychologist. And the way that I got there was pretty interesting along the way. But if you were to ask me when I was first a little kid what I wanted to be, it was a truck driver.
I've done quite a number of these interviews, Jason, and I have to say that was the first on being a truck driver. What were the transition moments that occurred to get you from that picture you have of yourself as a young child to where you are today as a psychologist?
Yeah, there were two defining moments for me, Bob, that shifted me from becoming a truck driver to becoming a psychologist. And the first was when I was 10 years old. I had a very close relationship with my maternal grandfather. He was someone I looked up to a great deal. We did a lot of things together, like fishing, playing games together, and just had a very warm relationship with him. And when I was 10, I was in school in a classroom, and the principal came by and pulled me out of the class and said, I have some sad news to share with you. Your grandfather has passed away. And so my mom came and picked me up. And when she picked me up, obviously I'm shell shocked, about him passing away, and my mom's in tears. And she said, there's more to the story. Your grandfather took his own life. He killed himself. He committed suicide. And this was a complete shock for me as a 10-year-old boy, because I had never heard of anyone taking their own life, or experienced that with anybody close in our family. And so that rocked me to my core. And so you can imagine, as a 10-year-old, I just had all kind of questions that I just peppered my mom and dad with. Why would someone do this? Why would grandpa do this? He seemed like someone who was happy, who enjoyed life, who loved his family. And so there was just a great deal of cognitive dissonance for me in trying to understand why someone I loved would do that. And so a year later after that, on the same day, my aunt, who was the daughter of my grandfather, she also committed suicide. and took her own life. And what those two events right there settled within me was, even though I couldn't tell you what a psychologist was when I was 10 and then 11 years old, that put the purpose and fire in my heart that I was very curious about why people make certain choices, whether or not they find their purpose in life. Basically, a lot of those things that are guided by psychology and philosophy. And so as I got older in high school, any courses that I could take that were electives related to psychology, I was taking those because that's what I was curious in and what I wanted to know more about. And I had a feeling that that's where my talents were, because that's where my passion and interest was as well. Those are just kind of one event that I pulled together. The second event then that led me down to how I'm using psychology now was with my mom. My mom had breast cancer. She fought it valiantly for 4 years, but unfortunately, she eventually succumbed to it in the winter of 2017. And as we were preparing and we had her on hospice care, it was around Christmas time. And so we were going to have Christmas early that year in early December, just in case she went downhill too fast and we didn't get to spend Christmas with her. Well, my mom and I have a very close relationship, and I decided one of the things I wanted to do for her when we got together for Christmas early in December was I wanted to write a letter to her, thanking her for everything that she's done for me in my life and what she means to me. Basically a capstone in a certain way of saying, I know I tell you verbally all the time that I love you and you mean everything to me, but I wanted to write it in a letter for her. And so I saw her on a Wednesday before we were going to celebrate on Saturday. I told her goodbye. I came home. I wrote the letter on Thursday. Unfortunately, she slipped into a coma Friday evening. So by the time we made it back to celebrate with her on that Saturday, she was already in the coma. And so I never got to deliver the letter to her and share in that experience with her. And so ultimately what I ended up doing was I actually put the letter in the casket with her at her funeral. And what that moment made a shift and a move within me in regard to was I didn't want anyone to be literally a day short or a day late in doing one of the most important things in their life. And I wanted to make that my calling and my purpose, to help people grow, to find their purpose, to understand their values, and to help them live those out in a purposeful way every day, and to not wait until it's too late to do so. So those are kind of the two main events that helped shape who I am in terms of becoming a psychologist, and then also catapulted me in terms of how I use psychology today in the work that I do.
Two very powerful messages, Jason. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. If a person, a friend, comes to you and they've just found out that because of COVID, their company is going through layoffs in their workforce, and that this friend has just lost their job, Jason, what are the 3 things that you would tell them to do right away?
That's a great question. And it touches on something that obviously is top of mind for everyone right now. Major changes are happening, and they're changes that are out of people's control. You know, the first thing I would share with them, number one, is it's not your fault, right? Unfortunately, for a lot of us, every single one of us as humans, research has shown we have a running inner dialogue in our heads that's telling us things about ourselves. And a lot of that research, you know, is showing how, you know, it's almost the same as if you have a negative inner dialogue about yourself. It's no different than having a conversation with someone who's talking negative to you. It activates the exact same parts of your brain. So the inner voice that you have, that inner dialogue that you have with yourself, is very important. And so the first thing I tell them is it's not your fault, and you need to tell yourself that these were things beyond your control. The next thing I'd share with them is this is an opportunity for you to think about who you are in terms of your personal identity and what you want out of life. So even though this is absolutely a terrible circumstance, and I don't want anyone to go through it, what is it that is within your control that you can do to try and move past this and move into the next chapter of your life? And for many folks whom I've spoken with, they've been treating it as an opportunity to step back out of the day-to-day grind and quite frankly, some of the monotony of just getting caught up and this is what I do each day, taking a step back, having some perspective and thinking about what are their core values and what do they want to devote their life and their time to, and what kind of legacy or impact do they want to leave behind. So that would be, number two is thinking about your core identity of who you are. And if you aren't sure what your core values are, do some, experimenting with that and find out what are the things that really make you tick that are really important for you. And then the third one, then I would share is when you are ready to go out and find that next opportunity of work, make sure that you find something that coincides with that identity that's going to help you live out your values and your mission in the world as well. Because life is short. We've seen that. And certainly the pandemic has brought that to light and made it more real for us. And so you want to make sure that you're spending your time doing the things that you think are the most important and resonate with your calling or your purpose to try and make the world a better place. So those would be the three things that I would share with them. It's not your fault. Identify those core values and then find a place that's going to help nurture those and help you live those values out for a larger mission.
Jason, I'm doing air quotes now. So not being employed, being in transition, being in between jobs is not a place of shame. You're more than a job. End of air quotes. What's that quote mean to you?
I love it. I absolutely love that. So much of who we are, we get our identity from the work that we do. And so sometimes we get these negative thoughts or these self-beliefs about who we are. And just because you might be out of work doesn't mean that your value has changed. You still are a valuable, unique person. There's only one of you in the world, and you absolutely have purpose. And it's just a matter of finding what is going to be that next opportunity that's going to help nurture and grow those things for you so that you can live that out.
If you're feeling at an impasse in your transition and you're just totally unsure about how to get yourself out of the muck and back rolling along, what steps should you take?
Well, that's a great question. That makes me think about a lot of research that's been done on this topic of what's called post-traumatic growth. So basically, there's been a lot of psychological research that has shown people who make it on the other side of adversity and show their resilience, that they actually show higher levels of functioning once they make it on the other side of the event. And so as long as that person has some protective factors, like they have people in their corner who support them, maybe they have a licensed therapist or a professional that helps them do some cognitive restructuring, as long as they have some of those protective factors in place that helps them get through those traumatic events, then many times when they get on the other side of that, they experience this post-traumatic growth. And so what I would recommend, the big part of what we do each day, funny enough, are habits. We don't talk about those a lot when it comes to trying to change things necessarily, but habits make up 43% of our daily actions, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it. So that's 43% of our day that the things that we do are on autopilot. And the fascinating thing too about it, Bob, is this wasn't just a number that came out of one study. It's been replicated across a lot of the people right now who are considered the experts in habit formation, like James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits, Wendy Wood, who wrote Good Habits, Bad Habits, and then Charles Duhigg, who wrote Smarter, Faster, Better. So it's been replicated across a lot of studies. And it's fascinating to think about that and the implications that 43% of your day, you're kind of on autopilot in terms of the things that you're doing. And on the one hand, that's really neat and cool because that means you're doing a lot of stuff and you're being efficient without you knowing it, that your operating system is just kind of working. The scary part about it is that if you haven't taken the time up front to be intentional about the kind of habits and processes that you want to have in place to be successful, then that means there's a propensity where you can very easily fall into habits that are just easy to do and they might not be healthy. When it comes to helping people transition, whether it's jobs or any other aspect of life, one of the first things I share with them is after we work on getting the mindset right, working on your inner dialogue, the next thing that you want to be intentional about is constructing the type of habits that you want to instill in your life, and then working on the process and the steps of what it's going to take in order to get those there. Because once you do that and you start getting those pieces in place, there's so many things then that you can kind of offload from your conscious mind to the unconscious mind, and you're just going to automatically do them. And then that frees up those mental resources of your conscious mind to focus on more of the deliberate actions and things that might be different from day to day. And then let your good habits that you have built, let those be the things that are operating on autopilot and getting a lot of the daily to-dos and things that need to be done off your plate.
So, Jason, when all the people we know are experiencing the same anxiety, the same stress and uncertainty due to the pandemic and loss of jobs or reduced hours or stuck at home, I think it feels harder to use our friends and our families to discuss our hardships because, we're all feeling that way. What do you do then when we're all in that same boat?
That's a powerful question. The first recommendation I would have is, even though we're all going through it, view it as something where it's this rule of reciprocity. And that means there's going to be times where you're the person doing the listening and trying to do some of the healing for somebody or being a sounding board. And there's going to be times where you're on the other side. And just because all of us are going through this traumatic event together doesn't change that rule. I'll give you a perfect example. My wife and I, there's certain days where dealing with the heaviness of the pandemic and many other things that are going on, where she's the one that's saying to me, Jason, you look like you need to talk about some things, or it looks like there's some things on your mind. Let's talk. And so opening that door and saying, from her perspective, even though I think she's having a rough day because she's taking care of our 4 sons who are all 6 and under, when she opens that door and says, it looks like something's on your mind, what's up? That just provides a great deal of relief for me and lets me know I have permission, that I don't have to feel ashamed of my feelings, or I don't have to hide them to protect her from the stress. That she's saying, let me be the strong one today and listen for you. And then on another day, the tables are going to turn, and it's going to be me reaching out to her and saying, it looks like things have been pretty rough today. Tell me about it. I'm here to help. What can I do? So I think that the key thing to keep in mind is, even though we're all going through this trauma together, don't be scared to reach out for help and ask someone. As long as we're all being honest with each other. And if you reach out and the person says, I'll tell you what, today's been a bad day for me too, but give me a day or two and we can talk, that's perfect.
Jason, how can I find out where my own personal strengths and weaknesses are at before I start my transition?
I love that question too. I would recommend getting a constellation of either mentors or a board of trustees, almost, for your personal brand or who you are personally. Right. And what I would recommend is that those would be a makeup of someone that knows you well, someone that doesn't know you well, someone who has worked with you, and then maybe someone who knows you in a certain context, is outside of what you spend a lot of time in. So that way you're getting kind of a well-rounded perspective of input from people about what they see in you and what they understand about you. So that would be my recommendation, is if you don't have a constellation network of either mentors or people that you trust, that you have a conversation with maybe, every couple months, that can be extremely powerful for providing some objective insights as to who you are, right? Because all of us have blinders, There's perceptual blindness that we have about ourselves, or blind spots, as we often call them. Surrounding yourself with people who aren't just going to sugarcoat things or aren't just your best friends, but people that are going to give you some objective insights into what they know about you or the things that they hear. Those are good things to give you a well-rounded 360 perspective of who you seem to come across as to other people.
In order to accelerate your job search or to help you in your transition process, you need to be comfortable with engaging your network of contacts to help you. But networking itself just freaks you out. How can you get more comfortable with that networking process?
Yeah, I would recommend just start maybe with one person. So ask for a referral from someone that you're already really close with. So like, let's say I reached out to you, Bob, and said, Bob, hey, in this process of transitioning, I'm trying to find a new job. I'm not comfortable yet. I need a lot more practice in having conversations with people, in selling myself, essentially, or talking about my skills and attributes. Do you know someone who might be a good start for me to practice with, who would give me some good feedback, who wouldn't be judgmental? So that's what I would recommend, is reach out to one person that you really trust and ask them if they have somebody who could be a good person to be a sounding board for that. The other thing I'd recommend too is, fortunately now we have a lot of wonderful technologies of what we can do to practice pitching ourselves or talking about our strengths. And so even if it's something as simple as just pulling your phone out and recording yourself and getting some practice sessions in of doing that, doing it in front of the mirror, whatever it might be that you do, rehearse, rehearse, rehearse so that you know your story. And then this kind of goes back into the habits thing. Once you know your story and you've got that down pat because you've rehearsed it front to back, what you'll find then is a lot of the anxiety and stress starts to come down, because once you start to go into autopilot mode a little bit, where, okay, I'm activating my different circuits in my brain that I've been rehearsing and practicing. And so a lot of this is just kind of, flowing naturally because I've rehearsed it so much. So those would be my two recommendations. Reach out to one person that you're really close with and see if they have somebody that you could practice on. Or then also, if you're not comfortable doing that yet, rehearse as much as you can, leverage technology to do so that you know your story front and back, so that it becomes almost a little bit like autopilot and becomes something that you've rehearsed and have, dedicated to memory when you engage with someone to share it.
Jason, many of us are in transition, not because we've lost our job, but we are transitioning because we're now working from home. Any thoughts on how the employers or the employees can maintain and encourage engagement now that we're mostly in a remote working world?
I can really relate to this one, Bob. My wife and I just had twins on May 14th.
Oh,
So right in the
congratulations.
middle. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so we were half parts excited and half parts terrified of how things would look at the hospital at the time. Fortunately, it was good at that point here in Indianapolis, so I was allowed to be there and see them be delivered. But in addition to me doing the transition to remote work because of the pandemic, I went through a major life event with my wife of, now we have twin boys born on May 14th, and we're adding them to our 3-year-old boy and our 6-year-old boy. And the 6-year-old boy is in first grade. So then, trying to do the learning from home, the remote learning for school. So there has been a tremendous amount of adjustment on our side, in trying to understand how to be efficient in working from home. And it has been a very challenging process. But I'll tell you, the thing that has been the most helpful for me with my team is that the empathy being on display. And what I mean by that is not just saying, oh, hey, Jason, I understand your circumstances, but my teammates are always taking the lead on doing certain things. And sometimes they don't even ask me. They know if I haven't gotten to something, they go ahead and do it. And they just get it done for me. because they know the circumstances I'm in. So I think something that can be done to help people, adjust is and continue to have those levels of engagement is doing things for each other, these acts of kindness, these acts of appreciation. And it doesn't just have to be from bosses to their to their direct reports. I mean, this can go omnidirectional. Like employees should be showing that to their bosses as well. And it said that for every negative, there need to be 5 positives. And that ratio actually came out of some psychological research because the way our brains are wired, we remember pain a lot of times that's associated with a negative comment or a negative circumstance, but it takes 5 times the positives sometimes to remember those. And so, thinking through that ratio, having a regular habit of appreciation that's being put on display by everyone in the organization is extremely important. I think to keep people engaged and let them know, number one, I see you and you're valued. And number two, your role and the work that you do is very important, and probably even more so now because of the circumstances. And number three, I'm here to help. What can I do? So I think showing empathy in those kind of ways behaviorally are some of the lowest hanging fruit, so to speak, that can be done from an engagement perspective to keep people feeling connected with their work, connected with their team, connected with their managers and the organization, and also make them feel valued and appreciated.
Do you have any tips or techniques a person should use to deal with the stresses and fears of being in transition?
I sure do. And I think this one's going to catch you a little bit off guard. Have you ever heard of someone having an alter ego?
Yes.
So alter egos, even though, they're kind of funny and you share them tongue in cheek, there's a lot of psychological research behind them in terms of helping people overcoming fear and anxiety and stepping into the challenge that's ahead of them. And, you've probably heard of, even celebrities, people who you would think, oh, they're used to being on stage, they're used to performing. Many of them have alter egos that they use, as they're preparing to go out and put on their show. Beyonce's one. Sasha Fierce is her alter ego. But coming up with these alter egos is a way for us to project the things that we aspire to be, the things that we aspire to do, that sometimes when our inner dialogue gets in the way, this taps into what we were talking about earlier, that sometimes we have that running inner dialogue that doubts ourselves, that might be negative, that thinks we're not capable of doing certain things. Well, if you can't get that inner dialogue to improve about yourself, kind of a shortcut then is to project the positives that you want to be onto someone else, this alter ego. But that alter ego is actually you, and you're stepping into it. For me, I have an alter ego. My alter ego's name is Doc Savage. And Doc Savage shows up whenever I'm doing podcast interviews, whenever I'm presenting at national conferences. And Doc Savage is very confident, and he's very prepared, and he knows what's expected of him. And so anytime, I have certain transitions or things that seem like a challenge for me, or that might induce some anxiety or worry or nervousness, then I channel Doc Savage to show up and step into that so that I can deliver and do my best.
Jason, many of today's careers don't have that linear upward ladder kind of trajectory that you go up one rung at a time. It's a much curlier progression, sometimes going sideways, sometimes going even downwards. How do you know you're growing as an individual if you don't have those upward milestone markers to see along the way?
Great question. Yeah, I think this would, for me, would get back to defining what success looks like for you as a person and what you're expecting to get, and then coming up with a growth plan of some kind that's going to articulate the goals for what you're trying to achieve, and then making sure that you're working on the lead measures or the behaviors in order to achieve that goal. And so, oftentimes as human beings, things aren't linear at all. I mean, I think the pandemic has taught us that. that curveballs happen in life, and then you've got to adjust to those. And so there might be some times where you're having a great week, you're keeping up with the activities you need to do in order to hit your goal for the growth you're trying to achieve. And there's going to be some weeks that you don't. But setting the goals is a very intentional, important thing to do up front in order to be having a scorecard for success. And then what that allows you to do along the way then is once you've articulated that, then you can make adjustments. You can start to see, okay, well, I thought this behavior is what, if I started doing this, that this was going to help me get to where I'm trying to go. I can see that it's not. So I'm going to change. I'm going to see what different type of behavior maybe I need to do now in order to meet this goal that I've set. So I think it's very important because of things not being linear that you define the success that you're trying to achieve. And that success may not be a promotion, or it might not be, more money. It might be something more related to, hey, you know what? I'm working on something personally here in this transition that I want to have fewer arguments at home with my spouse or with my children or with a friend. And so those things don't necessarily always have to be, about your success at work. They can also be things that have to do with growing as a person and figuring out what success and what those metrics are for you growing as a person in your personal life. And sometimes that might mean that it doesn't necessarily mean that if you're a salesperson that you're actually doing more sales. But hey, you're still growing as a person because guess what? You've got a healthier marriage. You have a healthier relationship with your children. So I think it's very important to articulate what your actual goals are, be intentional about that, define what success is, and then you need to figure out what are the behaviors I need to do in order to achieve that, and have that scorecard where you're trying to track those things so that you have clear line of sight and insights into whether or not what you're doing is moving the needle on achieving the type of success and growth that you've defined for yourself.
Jason, any books or other resources you'd recommend to someone going through transition?
Yeah, absolutely. There's two of them that have really helped me. The first one is called Emotional Agility by Dr. Susan David. This book is extremely helpful in understanding your emotions and how to take charge of those and how to use them for your good and your benefit, and especially whenever you're going through major life changes. So that would be the first book that I would recommend to your listeners is Emotional Agility by Susan David. The other one, and we touched on this a little bit today when we talked about habit formation and how that can be helpful in getting you set up with the right processes and the right behaviors as you deal with the transition to be successful in your new job or whatever it is you're transitioning to. And that is Atomic Habits is the name of the book. And the author's name is James Clear. And by the way, both of those authors, James Clear and Susan David, they have a newsletter that you can sign up for that'll give you a weekly digest of some very practical, evidence-based tips related to habits and related to how to channel your emotions and use those as a positive force in your life.
Jason, if our listeners only remember three things from what you've discussed today as they go through their own personal transition, what are those three things that you want them to take away?
Absolutely. I'd say habits. Focus on habits. Read the Atomic Habits book. It's very practical. It's going to help you understand how habits work and how to set yourself up in creating new healthy habits. Alter ego. I can't remember the name of the book, but there's actually a book out there on how to create alter egos. I would recommend you take a look at that to help you whenever there's times where if you can't get over your own inner dialogue being negative, figure out how to develop a healthy alter ego. And then the third thing would be think about creating that constellation or that network of mentors or people who can be that sounding board, the advisory board for your personal brand that will give you some objective insights into yourself that you probably are blind to yourself, or that people you're really close to in life may tiptoe on or may not give you the full picture of. They might, kind of filter it through rose-tinted lenses. So those would be my three: habits, alter ego, and then a constellation or network of mentors.
Jason Cochran, aka Doc Savage, You provided so much value, so much insight, so much caring to our listeners today. I want to thank you so much for being with us and for being willing to share your experiences and thoughts. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you for having me, Bob, and take care.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. We're working in unprecedented times as the world responds to the recent COVID-19 crisis. The fact is that even those who are not in transition understand it could be right around the corner, next month, or a year from now. The purpose of these episodes are to give listeners support and the critical tools to adjust with the winds, wherever they come. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully, perhaps gracefully, or without too many battle scars, survived their own obstacle courses, and can share useful information on how to steady your ship or your world in this uncertainty. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on social media. If you have any questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I appreciate your time you're investing in sharing these important conversations with me, my guests, and others who are going through life transition. Transitions between jobs, life stages, new entrepreneurial ventures, or whatever life brings. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode of People in Transition.